Tim and Tom.
Tom, you mentioned to me that you want to know more about some real estate.
Of course.
Obviously, when you want to do that, at Tim and Tom, we accept only the best, so we're going to go to the best realtors out. I mean, that seems easy enough to do. So we're going to go to Keller Williams Realty Partners. Did you know they're the largest brokerage in the city, Tom?
I did not.
Yeah. Over $1.2 billion in sales last year. Over 506 agents. Tom, we've got one of those agents here right now. And as far as I am aware, I've had some dealings with Keller Williams. This is the best. And it's Stacey Saladin.
Well, good. Our listeners deserve the best, so I'm glad that we can provide the best from Keller Williams.
Yeah, even more than we normally do, providing the best. We're doing so now in the realty aspect of it. And we have Stacey Saladin of Keller Williams. We a lot of back and forth. Stacey, you know me very well. You sold and helped me buy a couple properties recently. So we want to thank you for that. And it let me know that you'd be well to answer any and all of Tom's questions. Tom, you want to kick it off? What's your first question?
It's more of a general question, but what should someone who's looking to buy a house, what's the steps that they need to take before jumping in and, writing their name down on a contract? Like what do they need to do? What's some things that you would suggest they be prepared for example, first-time buyer?
That's a great question, and that's something everybody should ask before they jump into it, because there really is kind of an order of events that makes the process go a lot smoother. The very first thing, aside from finding a realtor and hiring someone to help you and represent you in your best interest throughout the process, is getting pre-approved. And what I mean by that is just figuring out your financing plans. If you're planning to get a mortgage, talking with a lender, going through that pre-approval process, and having that nailed down and having the letter ready to go, because it's a super competitive market right now. And if you're not really tight on your financing plans and have that really secure, then you really are at a disadvantage when you go out there and make an offer on a home. Aside from the pre-approval process, the other thing that I think is really important to do when you get started is just sitting down with the realtor who's going to be helping you navigate this whole process and having a good long conversation about what you're looking for, being clear on what your wants are, what your needs are, what are the things you can't give on, just making sure that you have a really clear picture of what you're out there looking for.
Let's go then on your side of that conversation. As the realtor, when you hear a want or wish list from a customer or, a client, how do you organize that? I mean, obviously, if the client's saying, we must have, for example, a garage, a 2-door garage or something like that. But how do you identify their wants with housing availability? Do you look at it as far as like, let's put this in order from 1 to 10, or are you just saying, I think this would be a good fit? How does that work for you?
Well, I listen a lot to the different things that they talk about and what they want, and I've been known to actually interview husband and wife separately because they're not always on the same page, and really try to kind of get down to what is that right list that we should be starting with. The other part of your question, kind of looking at the housing market and what's out there, the other thing that I'm doing as we're going through that list is piecing it all together and assessing, are they going to get what they want for what they want to spend? Like, is this a realistic list? Does it make sense? And what's the inventory like in this little niche that they're looking in? And how easy is it going to be to find options? How difficult is it going to be? And setting their expectations up front. Because if you're looking for example, a $300,000 house in southern Johnson County, you're going to have to be ready to be very aggressive and very competitive. And understanding that up front just helps the process go a lot smoother. Because once we get into it, especially in a market that's competitive like the one we are in right now, when the bidding starts, it goes very quickly, and you just have to be ready to make decisions on a pretty quick turnaround. So setting understanding what they want, giving them a realistic assessment of the market and how what they want fits into what's out there, just setting those expectations up front.
Tom, I've personally been in the war room in these situations with Stacey, and she is no joke. I mean, it's literally like, all right, hey, this is it. Pull the trigger now. Let's go, right? You gotta make a decision sometimes. Stacey, how insufferable are some? And I say insufferable, but how lofty maybe are some expectations? Like, who's the worst you've had to deal with, and why is it me?
And why is it you? Oh gosh, everybody just comes into it with a different perspective, and I've just learned to appreciate that some people are more educated about the market than others, and that's part of my job. And what I do is just kind of help people feel more educated and be prepared to to get into the game. Sometimes people do come into it with unrealistic expectations. And, one way that I try to help educate people is through showing them options and, giving them ideas of what is out there in their price range. And it sometimes doesn't take very long for them to look through options, even online, and say, you know what, this isn't at all what I want, and I'm going to have to spend more to get it, for example. Sometimes we go through a few iterations to just learn and educate. That usually kind of helps people get to a better point to know what they want to do.
Well, let's have a little fun here. You were mentioning that sometimes in a client's wish list, things get a little outrageous. Without naming names, because Tim is on the other end, what have been some of the more outrageous wishes from a client?
Wow, that's a good question. I'm going to have to think for a minute because I don't have a good answer off the top of my head.
I mean, have you come across anything like that that just set you back? I mean, or is it just, are people just more often like, well, I want a pool and I want it for $250,000, and you're like, well.
I think the more unrealistic than just like the requirements of the house, the more unrealistic expectations are probably around, depending on the market situation. Saying, okay, I'm going to go home and sleep on this. We'll talk about it over the next couple of days and decide if we want to make an offer.
Right.
When it's a situation that they're going to have 8 offers that night, you can't sleep on it. At least in the last couple of years, that's probably a better example of unrealistic expectations, is just feeling like you have time to kind of think about it when you might not, and feeling like you can, as a buyer, you don't have the upper hand right now as a buyer, generally speaking. The expectation that you can come in and maybe offer less than they're asking if it's, a hot neighborhood that generally sells in a day. You're just not going to be able to do that.
It's been my experience, too, with you. You've sold 2 homes of mine in, half as many years. We had multiple offers in the first weekend. There is no time to waste on these things. I think traditionally people think that happens kind of in waves over the year, but it sounds like that has been the case now for a steady clip going for a couple of years now. Am I reading that right?
It has. The last 2 to 3 years has been a really good market for sellers. I would say the last year has been the best of those 3 years. And inventory right now, that's the reason for it. Inventory is just very low. Inventory at the end of this past month here, the end of January, was lower than it's been in over 12 years. It just keeps getting harder and harder for buyers to find homes because there aren't enough listings out there. Just as an example, the inventory that's out there at the end of January in the entire metro area is just right around 6,000 houses. And
wow.
This is kind of a crazy comparison, but 10 years ago, there were 21,000 houses out there for sale.
So are we experiencing...
So 71% drop in 10 years. And then over last year, it's still a 20% drop in the inventory. It's just a super, super low inventory market right now.
It sounds just like astronomical numbers. So are we experiencing a large increase in population movement into the metro, or is a certain population boom coming of age? Like, what's happening to just soak it all up? Like, are people owning 4 houses now? I don't really think that is going on.
I don't think there's a huge change or huge trend from that standpoint. I just think that there are fewer people who are holding back on listing their houses. And this is just theory on my part, but I think over the past couple of years, every time we get to a presidential cycle, people kind of hold back a little bit. We see a little bit of this hesitation with the uncertainty around presidential elections. And so perhaps over the last year or so, that had a little bit to do with it. Other than that, it's not, I don't think it has anything to do with population change or anything like that in Kansas City.
So you were mentioning earlier about when people are going in, some of those like rookie mistakes. Could you tell us what those are so people who are looking to buy don't make those?
I'll say that a lot of that has to do with each situation. I think it's important to listen to your agent when they give you an assessment of kind of, here's the situation with this particular house that you want to buy. If it's a competitive house, you're going to have to be aggressive in how you go after it, and thinking that you can go in and get a deal is probably not going to be your best approach. I think sometimes if people haven't bought a house in, say, 10 years, they're remembering a different market. They're remembering when they went in with the upper hand and when they could kind of dictate the terms and, they were pulling a lot of the levers. And if that's what they remember and they don't really understand the market, they go into it thinking that they can approach it the same way. And they're not listening to their agent's advice about what they're up against and what the competition might be like on this particular house. Then they're losing the advantage of knowing how to compete. And that's probably the biggest mistake that I see and hear about. I see it on the buyer side if I'm working with a buyer client, but I also see it on the listing side. When I have a house that's listed and we're getting 8 offers, and I see some offers come in below asking price where that agent and that buyer know that there's multiple offers, but they're still not really going after it. That's probably the biggest mistake that I see.
On that buying end of it then, where you've got to make multiple offers on different things and you've got to make them quick and you've got to do these sorts of things, is that leading to any sort of disdain among clientele, or do they feel kind of just worn out by the process? How does that affect the psyche?
I think it can. I think that's a good question. And I think more so, with certain buyers who maybe have to go through that cycle multiple times. I've sold homes as a listing agent where the buyer's agent came to me and said, okay, this is our 6th attempt. We've offered on 6 different houses and we've lost on everything. And so what do we need to do to get this house? Sometimes if a buyer goes through it that many times, they do really start to get worn out. Sometimes it gets so competitive, and sometimes buyers end up paying so much over the asking price that they do sometimes come back and have a little buyer's remorse. Did I really need to do that?
So looking more, let's zoom in a little bit here. Do you see any sort of trends at all that pop out to you lately, or is everything just kind of on the rise for sellers in every style, or does anything stick out? Like, do we got, $1 million homes are going fast, but $100,000 homes are sitting there? Is there anything like that?
As far as price ranges go, anything under about $350 is selling very quickly. That's the price range that's super hot right now. There are still certain neighborhoods, certain areas that are in those higher price points that are still moving quickly, but they take a little longer to sell because there just are fewer buyers who can buy those homes. So from a price range standpoint, definitely the up to 350s are moving quickly. Other trends, just in terms of types of homes, I do see more people downsizing. That happens, I think, as people start to retire and that type of thing. But I even see more people with young kids who are feeling like, I don't want this really big house anymore. I think we see fewer of the big McMansions, as they used to be called, and more people looking for functional design in their houses. So even if you look at new construction right now, you see design changing a little bit to be more functional, to where people are really using all the parts of their home. Like I said, I even see families with kids, younger kids, who are purchasing homes where there's single level living with a basement. There's more and more of what we call the reverse story and a half style that are being built because more people are looking for that main level living.
One quick question I have for you, and this is more just because I had a friend who took part in this, the tiny homes. I actually just went to IKEA the other day. They had a couple different layouts for tiny homes. Is that a trend that's actually gaining some traction, or do you think that's just a fad?
I've seen some of that online. I haven't really seen a lot of it actually happening in real life, at least in this area. At this point, I wouldn't say it's a big trend that I see happening.
So you had mentioned about being a part of both the selling of a home and buying of a home. And another preference kind of question, which one do you prefer, and what are the different challenges for a realtor on both ends of that sale?
Oh, wow. Well, yeah, as far as preference, I love them both. There's not one that I like better. I love working with families who are both selling and buying and working on that whole process and getting them moved to a new home. There are, I think, a lot of advantages to a realtor who does both. There are some agents who just are considered buying agents, some who are just considered listing agents, and that's all they do. I personally see a lot of benefit in doing both because when I'm working with a buyer, for example, I have the advantage of understanding how sellers think because I work with sellers as well. And I think, as you get into any kind of negotiation, that's certainly helpful. As far as challenges to either one or, anything to point out on that, it really has to do with the market. I mean, working with sellers right now, it's more a matter of educating them on how the process is going to work, especially if it's going to be a quick selling home, planning around how to go to market, how to maybe set some parameters around the sale process and the showing process and the offer process. What I mean by that is, for example, I'll give you an example from just a few months ago. I had a seller who we knew the house was going to sell fast. I knew it would sell on the first day. I knew we'd probably have multiple offers. I knew they were going to have a ton of showings. And so, I really worked with them on the plan of the exact time it was going to hit the market. We sent them to a hotel with their dogs for 2 nights. We said, just get out of the house. You're going to be in and out, in and out. Let's just make it a little easier on you and just go stay in a hotel for a couple days. And then we set a time frame around when we were going to review offers. So they knew exactly what was going to happen over those few days. They knew that they were going to be just hanging out in the hotel for a couple of days. They knew that at 5 o'clock on Sunday, we were going to talk about any offers that they'd gotten over the weekend. Their expectations were set in terms of how that process was going to go. And they knew that on Sunday night, they were going to have to make a decision about something. Mm-hmm. Now, with the buyer, there used to be the days where we'd look online and we'd find 4 or 5 houses and say, okay, let's go, let's plan on going out next week and looking at these 4 houses. Those 4 houses aren't going to be there next week in today's market, most likely. So today with buyers, the showing process, that going out and looking at houses is a lot different because we're most often going out and looking at one at a time, and we're going really quickly. So something pops up online that morning, we're on the phone saying, when can you get away from work today to go look at this, because it's probably going to sell tonight. And so the processes are just, really different than they were even 5 years ago.
So I think we're highlighting some great reasons, as Stacey has mentioned here. It varies so much on the market. It varies so much on the price point. It varies so much on the affordability of the buyer or the seller, that this is 100% why you need to enlist the help of a realtor before you even think about even trying to start looking at homes. So, Stacey, what then? How long have you been doing this? How long have you been a realtor?
About 9 years.
So what's the training and education like then for somebody to get into this? Because it sounds like you have to know and be able to figure out so much stuff.
Well, there is a lot to understand, especially with changing markets. I mean, the licensing process is, there's a certain number of hours of education you have to take. You have to pass certain exams and do continuing education. That's not the hard part. I mean, I'll be honest, it's not hard to get your license. What's hard is being a really good realtor and really understanding what's going on in the market and understanding when it's a dynamic market, how to change with that, how to learn as the market changes and evolve with it. Because, I got in 9 years ago. I was in 2009, which was literally like the worst market we've had in I don't know how long. Right. So I don't know what I was thinking in 2009, but I jumped in and it's been great. I mean, I learned in like the worst market I could possibly have learned in, but the market's really different. It's changed. Like I said, I went from having 21,000 houses out there to look at to having 6,000 houses. Mm-hmm. So I've seen a lot of different market dynamics, and knowing how to look at the data, look at the market trends, and understand them and communicate them in a way to clients is one of the most important things that I do. Because my job, the way I see it, a big piece of it is to educate my clients and to help them make sure they have really good information to make really big decisions off of. The hard part isn't necessarily becoming a realtor, it's being a good one, because there's a lot to understand and there's a lot of importance on communicating it in a way that people understand it so that they can make the best decisions for themselves.
One thing I know about realtors also, and I've seen it in action by watching you too, is I feel like you're never not working. How do you handle a workload like that? Like, you're always taking phone calls. You're working on the weekends for showings. You're handling crazy guys who do podcasts yelling about the buyers of their home being unreasonable. You're dealing with all sorts of weird things going on. How can you juggle all that? Do you have to take a measured approach to that? How does that work out? It's
something to get used to. Before I was a realtor, I was in corporate America for 18 years. Mostly in corporate finance, did some HR and some corporate real estate. But I came from a corporate world where I went to an office and worked from 8 to 5. So this is a really different way to work, and it takes a little bit of getting used to. But the best way I can describe it is that my personal life and my work life, I mean, they all just weave together. There's really not a separation. And, for some people, they don't like that. They like to be able to shut off and just stop. But for me, if I need to go have a personal appointment in the middle of the day, I can do that. I have the flexibility to do that. Everything just kind of fits itself into my schedule, and I adapt when I need to my clients' needs. I have buyers who come in from out of town, and they're only here for a couple days or whatnot, and I need to be flexible. And offers come in at 10 o'clock at night, and it's not unusual to be on the phone at midnight with multiple agents trying to get it figured out. So I appreciate the flexibility I have during most of my days if I need to do something personal, and I know that I'm going to need to make a commitment to to do the midnight phone calls and the weekend work sometimes when it calls for it.
Well, I personally apologize for all of the bad stuff that we put you through. But I do know this. I mean, we clearly shown why people need a realtor and why Stacey Saladin here is a perfect one to use. You know what else she does?
Sounds like it.
You know what else she does, Tom? She maintains a lifelong relationship with her clients. I've been to so many holiday parties now at her place. We get regular mailings, and I've gotten to meet so many people who she must have helped everybody in the city because everybody just comes around. It's great. So, Stacey, what's some contact info if people want to get a hold of you and see if you can help them out?
Oh, yeah. My website is StaceySaladin.com, and it's Stacey with an EY, StaceySaladin.com. And my Gmail address is stacy.saladin@gmail.com. And my phone number is 913-269-0900.
Any lasting piece of advice for anybody thinking that they're on the fence, either buying or selling a home? Any kind of words of calming or anything before we go?
I would say if you are thinking of selling, now is the time, and I'd be happy to walk you through a complete market analysis to educate you on kind of what to expect in terms of pricing and timing of a sale. I will say, as a seller also, I do think that it's easy to think in this market that you can do a for sale by owner, and you can. And in all honesty, you probably can sell it by yourself. But the important thing to remember is that a realtor is going to get you a lot more exposure to your house. They're going to get a lot more buyers through your house. And the key to higher prices right now is creating that competition in that environment. And that only comes from getting as many people through as possible and networking with as many agents as possible. And it's hard to navigate that kind of interest when you've got 6-8 offers coming in. Understanding how to communicate with all those different agents and buyers bringing you offers, knowing where your negotiating advantages are, and getting the best deal possible. That's not something that is easy to do if you're not in it every day. So that would be my advice to sellers. My advice to buyers is don't be scared. I've made it sound really hard to buy a house right now. But if you have a good agent who knows how to find out about inventory that might not be on the market yet, knows what's coming so you can plan ahead, and is a very good co-op agent, works well with other agents, and is an agent that people want to work with, you're going to be going in with an advantage. Those would be my pieces of advice to buyers and sellers right now.
Really good advice. See, she
I like it. This was very informative.
I told you she knows her stuff. Stacey, we really appreciate you coming on here, spending some of your time, which I know you've probably got to get some paperwork done and some calls made here as soon as we're done with this. So I appreciate you coming on, and we urge anyone to go out and get a hold of you if they're looking to buy or sell.
Well, I sure appreciate you having me. Thanks, guys.
Tim and Tom.
So, Tom, there's a lot to the real estate market. You need a good realtor.
Yeah, obviously, like she said, she gave some good information on why to have a realtor. I mean, obviously, the more exposure, the more competitiveness, the higher the price. That's obviously what you're trying to do when you sell a house. And obviously, on the other end of that is buying a house. You obviously want to get the most bang for your dollar. You want to come up with a wish list that makes sense. So I think she covered all bases there. So really liked it. Really informative. Again, check her out on her contact information that she gave just a couple moments ago. And if you're in the market to buy or sell, contact our girl, Stacey.
Do it. And obviously, personalities matter, and everybody's looking for something different. So obviously, there are plenty of great realtors at Keller Williams also. But I think the overarching is make sure you get a quality realtor, interview them. But I would urge you, I specifically know for my taste that Stacey's a very highly qualified realtor. So we will let you soak that information up and do with it what you will while we take a break, because we're going to come back and Tom's going to give us some of the coolest events happening around the metro when we come back to Tim and Tom.
Fun fact, chocolate manufacturers use 40% of the world's almonds.
Tim and Tom.
This episode of Tim and Tom is brought to you by Your Business. Tim and Tom's listeners could be hearing about your business right now. They could be hearing your business's address, or your business's website address, or even your business's phone number. But they're not hearing that right now, are they? If you want the listeners of Tim and Tom to know more about your business, contact us at timandtomkc@gmail.com.
Tim and Tom.